Becky, hello.
Hello.
It's so good to have you here.
I know, it's so nice to be here. I feel a bit nervous though. This is like my first podcast recording podcast interview since probably the last time I was on your podcast, which was like over a year ago.
Yes.
So I'm like, oh, what if I don't know what to do?
You're gonna know, I'm sure you're a natural. Yeah, because that's one of the things I was gonna say. Like, it's been a long time coming because we have recorded together before
Hmm.
and the audio didn't survive. I've never had it happen before. And yeah, the girl who does my podcast was just like, it can't be saved. But here we are. What is it
Obviously
like
wasn't meant to be.
14 months later, did you say?
Yeah, well, probably a bit more actually, but yeah.
Oh, that's wild, isn't it? So, yeah, thank you for being here. I've got some specific things that I'm excited to talk to you about because I know that we do have some similarities in terms of what we're
Hmm.
passionate about. And, you help people with like, oh, in fact, let me not go into that. Why don't you, yeah, introduce yourself? Let us know a bit more about what you do.
Yes, so I'm an integrative psychotherapist and empowerment coach. So really, I see my role, my mission, my purpose as supporting people to just like embrace who they really are and feel confident in who they are and have the courage essentially to create the life they want, to get what they want, to go after what they want. Because I feel like that and everything I just summarized has been like my biggest initiation in life and continues to be, in terms of just feeling like I'm always almost like shedding these layers and like letting go of parts of myself in terms of like conditioning and the person that I've needed to be and who other people expect me to be, both in terms of, my like initial world, like parents, family, friends, but also wider society. Like we're so deeply conditioned, aren't we, to be whatever and whoever we need to be to fit into a box. And yeah, I feel like that's just become clearer and clearer over time, that that's what I'm here for, is to
Mm.
like live that life myself and like go into that work myself to then kind of pave the way for others.
Mm. And I definitely want to explore that a bit because I know a lot of the people listening to this podcast or watching, actually, they do struggle a bit with being themselves,
Mm,
with separating themselves from relationships, putting themselves first, figuring themselves out because a lot of their focus is on either another person or on how do I be good enough for someone.
mm-hmm.
There are patterns of avoidance where perhaps it could be the opposite. So I'm also aware of that. Um, can you, just before we dive into that a little bit more, can you tell us a little bit about your love story?
Yeah, I remember you asked me this last time actually, and I've
Yeah.
no idea, what I said. Um, so I guess I don't really know how far back to go with that, but the thing that I kind of like want to say first of all is I think my experiences of love as a child were quite conditional. Um, my parents split up when I was quite young, and my dad was my primary caregiver for a long time. Um, my relationship with my mum was quite complicated because she had lots of her own stuff going on, and I think because of that, well, then without giving you my full life history, but like then my parents kind of remarried. So I was, I am an only child, but I then like existed in these two different kind of families where there was siblings there, as in like I had step siblings, but they were, like biological siblings to one another. Um, and I think I just spent quite a lot of my childhood feeling not very loved, which isn't because I wasn't loved, because like intellectually I know I was, and I, but I guess at that time I think I just felt a lot of feelings of like not good enough and feelings of not really fitting in, feelings of like not really knowing where I belong, feelings of like instability, probably feelings of like responsibility, as in, like as a kid we always we're very egocentric, aren't we, as children? So like we locate the problem very much as like within us. So that's kind of how I felt as a child in that sense of like love. But in terms of like romantic relationships, my husband I've been with now since like 1920. We were friends, went to school together but didn't get together at school. We always have this like running joke in the family that Matt just like basically followed me around until I gave up. That's like the running joke in the family, because I was off like, I don't know, doing my thing and like getting with all the, you know, when you go through that phase, or I feel like lots of people in my world go through that phase of just getting with like knobheads basically. I guess you can give more context to that from an attachment perspective. So I went through all of that phase, and then I was like, I think I was actually quite scared of, we've talked about this recently, of my relationship with him, because he almost didn't fit that narrative in my mind of being an knobhead. And I think there was something about that like scared me, in terms of like, I knew that because we were so close as a friendship, that if we got together it would be not only like serious but also like very real. And I think I probably didn't really feel worthy of that, in terms of like real love, and to be treated with true respect, and to be treated with, well, ultimately what we all deserve, which is, yeah, that kind of unconditional love, I guess. Anyway, that I guess there's like lots I could say about that, but I'll not ramble forever. But I think there's been lots of initiations within our relationship. Interestingly, since Freddie as well, since my little boy was born last year, around both of our roles within the relationship, and our own kind of insecurities and our own patterns and how they play out, and how, yeah, like I can definitely fall into that pattern of like really, really wanting connection but also really, really fearing it. And even now, like I feel like I've healed a lot of that just by nature of us being in a relationship. But it's interesting how, you know, maybe initially those patterns feel quite obvious, but over time they almost get more subtle. So I feel like, you know, our relationship has changed really significantly, and I think there's periods in we've been together a long time, so I think there's been periods where we've almost been at a misalignment with our kind of emotional journeys. And then obviously you kind of have to work through that to then think about what that means for your own relationship and your own connection. So that was a really long-winded answer, but
No,
I
it's great.
you know, I go deep fast.
Do you know what? Sometimes this is off the side, but when I'm listening to other people's podcasts and they give really, really long answers, I always think, oh my God, I should do that more. So
Oh really?
seeing
I
you
always
be
think
like,
the
oh,
opposite.
yeah, no, I think it's great. Like, I don't even think that was long-winded and stuff, but yeah. So can I just ask for context?
Yeah.
I'm just going to give away your age. How long have you been together?
10 10 years. No, it'll be 11 years in summer. It'll be 11 years this year.
Just for that little bit of information, I'm sure there's a few people like, how long has it been?
Yeah.
What would you say then to people, particularly that are listening and have that struggle from the past of fitting in, trying to fit in, not quite feeling loved, and they can perhaps see that now of like that push and pull between wanting that connection, maybe not quite knowing where or how to go for that. But what do you say to that person?
Oh, there's so much I could say, but like I think the first thing that I always say to my own clients, and that I always remind myself of, is that like we're biologically programmed to want to fit in and to want connection. So a lot of the time, like especially on social media, and you know, like I've probably alluded to this kind of message too, we see messages around like, don't fit in, be your own person, like don't forget what other people think, like just do you, I don't care what people think, blah 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 blah. And it's almost like that part of us that wants to fit in and wants to be like others and wants to be wanted, we kind of make ourselves wrong for. And I feel like that perpetuates this cycle really of like, oh my god, like I'm not good enough because I'm so needy and I want this and I want that and I want the other, and I'm always comparing myself and this, that and the other. But actually, like, we're biologically programmed to do that because, you know, like, I feel like I've been reminded of this, which is interesting with now having Freddie. It's like I'm reminded of everything I kind of knew, but from like a very different lens. But it's like he does whatever he needs to do to get his needs met because he is like solely responsible. Sorry, I am solely responsible for him. Like, he is, you know, 100% dependent on me. And that goes for all of us. You know, when we're born, we are dependent emotionally and physically on our primary caregivers. End of. Like, if they're not giving you what you need from like a really basic level, you're no longer here. Like, you can't survive. That's like the bottom line. And then of course, like, the, you know, the next layer to that is, as a species, we would then become extinct and we wouldn't be reproducing if no one wanted to be with us. Do you know what I mean? So from day dot, we do what we need to do to get those needs met. And like, you know, as a newborn baby, a lot of that is about crying, right? Because that creates that kind of stress response within your caregiver that goes, oh my god, they need something, what do they need, I need to work it out and I need to give them it. So of course, as we get older, that changes, as in, you can meet your needs more and you can give yourself what you need, but that like biological programming doesn't go away because, like I just mentioned, we still need to experience connection from a biological level to reproduce. Because if no one likes us and no one wants us, then we're not going to be in a relationship and we're not going to be reproducing, are we? So it's like, I think sometimes we almost just need to remind ourselves that you're meant to do that. Like, you're meant to compare yourself to others. You're meant to just understand yourself in the context of like other people. You're meant to be in relationship. You're meant to want connection. You know, all of those things are fundamentally part of who we are. But I think what ends up happening is that, because partly because of the world that we live in and partly because of, you know, those more specific experiences that we've had within our relationships, and within our childhood and adulthood, I guess, it's like that you know, experience of kind of comparison exists on a bit of a spectrum, I think. So there's that kind of more healthy maybe place that we can be in, where we kind of acknowledge our differences to other people, or we acknowledge who we are in relation to other people, we acknowledge, you know, what we need to do to get our needs met and the connection that we desire and all of those things, is kind of at one end of the spectrum. And then the other end of the spectrum is obviously when like our whole sense of self is dictated by other people and we kind of externalize our power and we externalize our self-worth, and like none of that is coming from within. And I guess that's probably what you're alluding to, and where I've definitely been and where a lot of my clients are. It's like they're at the end of the spectrum where they become disconnected from who they authentically are because they're kind of living life on everyone else's terms, which is a tricky one because to a certain extent we all are, because of the society we exist in. So that's like really difficult to differentiate, isn't it? But I think that would be like my number one, is remember that you're like biologically programmed to do this. So don't let it be like another thing that you make yourself wrong for almost.
Yeah, honestly, such a huge part of what I do, more and more and more, is compassion work. It just comes up time and time again. So, what are the signs for you? And you can go past or present, but what are the signs for you then that you are disconnected from your, yeah, authentic self, right? And I guess that I'm guessing from the work that you're doing that you have more and more got to know your real self, authentic self, whatever we want to call it. But what are the signs that you're disconnected?
Um, so I think like the kind of more general signs are when I'm doing things that like they don't feel fulfilling, like they don't light me up, they don't feel like this is who I am and this is what feels good. That's more generally, but I think something I've noticed as I've like got deeper and deeper into this work, that the signs are a bit more subtle. So, and I'm like always learning, as we all are, about ourselves, but like now I see it a lot play out in business where I don't know, I might be like told by or advised by a coach, or I'll see other coaches doing things in a certain way, whether it be like how they show up in social media, the type of things they share, or the type of offers they create. And it's almost like I unintentionally start kind of like molding myself to who I need to be like a quote unquote successful business owner. And then I kind of go full circle and I'm like, oh, that does not feel aligned at all. Like, no, no wonder it didn't work. But it's almost like sometimes I feel as though you have to do things to know whether it fits. But I think what helps is coming back to that reflection of like, did that actually feel like me? Did that actually feel true to me? Did that actually feel authentic to me? And it's almost like noticing that in any moment, like when you're saying things, is that actually what I believe, or is that what I felt like I should say? Or when you're making decisions, it's like, is that what I actually want, or is that what I think I want because everyone else wants me to do it? And it's like, it can play out in such subtle ways, can't it? So I think it's noticing like when there's resistance within you, or when there's like a lack of fulfillment or a lack of satisfaction or a lack of alignment. It's really difficult to put into words, isn't it, sometimes, because I think it's like a very emotional experience that I feel quite a lot in my body now. Like it's almost like I feel a sense of like tension or like anxiety that reflects like, oh, this isn't actually you. And it's almost that kind of internal battle between who you think you need to be in that moment and what you think you need to do versus like your authentic true self. And it's almost like those two like kind of battling within you.
Yeah. And I can't help but think of different stages that people are in when they hear this. So you've got the people that are listening and just get it. Like, oh yeah, I totally know that. I know when I'm disconnected. They've been probably doing that inner work. And then we probably got people that are listening that just like, I've got no idea who I am, because
Yeah.
perhaps they've not even gone through the experimenting stage. Like you really have to experiment, right, with what you like, what you don't like.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'm thinking of is, creating change and getting in touch with your real, truest self is really difficult to do when you are still engaging with people where there's poor treatment, where someone is disrespecting you. Like your environment isn't this really stable place right now because you are still engaging with someone that's like just that hot and cold, that instability. Where do you, and maybe you remember for yourself, but do you have any starting points when it comes to, right, I'm going to start figuring out who I am. I don't know what I think, I don't know what I feel, I've still got this going on in the background. Where do you
I,
start?
I think my starting point was, because mine's very much been a gradual thing. Some people have this like crisis point where they hit rock bottom. I've never really experienced that. It has very much been like a gradual unfolding. But I remember when I was like 17, 18 onwards, I started to question, not it wasn't like a conscious thing of like, right, I need to start working on this, but I started to question the way I saw myself. And I think the thing that I started to do was almost like detach from some of the stories and the labels that I'd been given. So for example, to give you like a tangible example, I'd always been like labeled as a child as like an anxious child. And I started like really, really like owning that myself. So it was like, oh, like I can't do that, I'm an anxious person, or oh, I need you to like help me understand this because I'm feeling really anxious about, well, I'm an anxious person. And then that I would then form that identity in my family. So it's like, oh, there's Becky, she's off on an anxious tangent again, or just this whole, I felt like this whole identity I had was built on the fact that like I was anxious and it like bled out in everything that I did or like didn't do. And like my starting point was, how do I, is that label serving me essentially? Like, are these labels that I give myself that we often do to empower ourselves, whether it be around, and like this might be a bit of a contentious issue, but if we're labeled as like having anxiety or like having depression or having a lack of confidence or having, for you, it might be like having an insecure attachment or whatever. It's like those labels can be really empowering to a certain extent, because it's like, oh, that's the way I am, which is kind of where I started. It's like, oh, I'm not this terrible person, I just struggle with these things. But I really had to start relating to those stories and those labels differently, to start reconnecting with who I was in and amongst that, because like anxiety wasn't me, it was an emotion I experienced. Like for me, having an insecure attachment wasn't me, it was like a relational pattern I experienced. And it's almost like, how can you just loosen the grip on all of these labels, on all of these stories that you tell yourself, on all of these beliefs that you have about yourself? Start kind of getting curious and asking, like, is this empowering me? Like, is this enabling me to be more of who I am? Or is this actually quite disempowering and almost causing me to kind of fit into yet like another box? Because I think there is a point when those things are empowering, when you're kind of like trying to understand why you are the way you are, but actually you can't change something whilst over identifying with it and like owning it as fundamentally who you are. And I think, yeah, that's definitely the starting point, because in loosening the grip, you then start to become more and more connected to who you are beneath those things. But you have to disconnect from those things first,
Yeah, honestly, it's such an important topic for this podcast, especially because obviously it's called Lessons in Attachment. It's all about attachment styles and those labels. And I'm always one of the first to say, if my client comes in like, what attachment style am I? This is what I want to know. Of just saying, well, hold on a second, you're all of the attachment styles. We have all of these strategies.
Mm,
Everyone is secure, everyone has anxious strategies, everyone is avoidant in areas, and getting stuck on that label, it's it's like you say, great starting point, really incredibly empowering for recognizing our patterns and knowing it's not our fault, and being able to take responsibility. But in terms of, well, now I've got an anxious attachment and this person is avoidant, so they should do that and I should do this, and what is the exact steps that we take, you get lost in that as well.
mm,
And you're then still kind of lost because you're looking for this specific strategy to follow, whereas it's all so nuanced, right? And as you start to
yeah,
discover yourself and go beyond that, I always say to people, you're so much more than an attachment style, so much more. But it's just great for a starting point.
absolutely. And I think this reminds me of a conversation I had with someone recently who was like, I think I might have autism. And they were like looking at all of the kind of, when you go down that rabbit hole of like, you look for the symptoms of something and then you see all the evidence and then you convince yourself of it. They were very much in that. And I was trying to zoom out and be like, what is it that you're actually wanting from this? Because if we've experienced a lot of powerlessness in our life, like a lot of experiences where life's felt very out of our control, it's felt unstable, it's felt, we've had that feeling of insecurity in our relationships and in our world, then that's a very familiar feeling, isn't it? So it's quite easy to fall in, we were just literally talking about this before the podcast, weren't we? Fall into a pattern of like finding that powerlessness again and giving your power away. So whether it's that you give it away to a label because it's like, oh, well, I am this and I can't do anything about this because it's the way I am. And, you consciously want to change that, but like subconsciously you want what's familiar and safe, right? And then, or you give it away to a coach, like you go to therapy or you go to coaching and you're like, I need you to change me. I need you to fix me. And it's like, these, I don't know, kind of ways of understanding, if we're not careful, can become another way that we are reinforcing that same pattern of powerlessness.
Mm-hmm. I see it an awful lot at the moment. Like it is, I'm literally like, wow, this is happening a lot with, there must be some kind of link with ADHD. Obviously, I've looked into it because it was coming up so much. And I was like, right, okay, just on a basic level, I can see The skills to go from insecure to secure, typically speaking, if we were to list them, aren't so dissimilar to that support people with ADHD. So let's do this, you know?
Yeah. And equally, like, the symptoms are similar, aren't they? Like,
Yes.
by the way, just, I guess you're probably on the same page, but it's not to like disrespect or
Oh God,
undermine
no.
anyone with those diagnoses, but it's about like understanding you as a whole person, isn't it? And
Mhm.
fundamentally, the symptoms of ADHD are very similar to that of anxiety, aren't they? In fact, probably all the same. And I remember when I used to work in a young offenders unit, a young offenders institute, where most of those kids were diagnosed with ADHD because, you know, lo and behold, they have this identity of being like the naughty kid, quote unquote. They are, you know, disruptive, they are challenging, they all have, you know, predominantly insecure attachments where they struggle in relationships, they struggle with connection. But like, all of that is because the majority of them, if not all of them probably, well, in fact, I would say all of them, have experienced trauma in their early childhood, which means that they have an insecure attachment, they have, you know, very anxious tendencies, they have all of these struggles because they've not had that stability and that security and that safety emotionally or physically. So we label them with ADHD, but then it's like, well, we're not acknowledging all of the other things that have contributed to those symptoms. So I think like the question that comes, you know, you ask like, where do you start? The first question is like, what labels, stories and narratives am I attached to that are disempowering? But secondary to that is like, well, how are they serving me? You know, how is that diagnosis of ADHD serving me? If it is disempowering, you know, like, what is it protecting me from? Which sounds like a weird question. I asked my client that the other day, and she was like,
No,
well, it's not. And I'm like, no, I know you think it's not, but it also is.
it is. It is. We know for sure. That is one thing we do know for sure. I do something with some people called the wanting, not wanting process.
Ooh.
And it's looking at that, and it's just asking, like, that part wants something, and there's something it doesn't want for you as well.
Mm.
And I remember when I used to deliver workshops for the NHS, and in the depression course that we did, there was a section where we had to, right near the beginning, where we would do the pros and cons of depression.
Mm-hmm.
And because it was a group, and I've done enough groups in my time, I would set it up so much so that, because I knew there was always going to be one or two people like, that's ridiculous. How can there be any pros of this? So I'd really have to set it up of like why I'm asking this question, what it really, really means. And the reality is like that it's not like we're saying the pro is in I love it, I enjoy it. It's that there's something in us that finds this strategy to be useful, or it has done in the past, right? And can I just say something? I'm sure I'm not the only one thinking this. How did you have these realizations at 18, 19 years old?
I don't know.
You must just be like real,
Well, they
really, really
weren't.
connected.
So I think where it started was this awareness of. So I've always been. I think I said this in the last podcast. I've always been really curious about people, which I know sounds like a bit textbook, but I remember going places and just being like, I'm really not interested in what's happening here. I'm more interested in like watching everyone. Like, my dad would take me to football games. And I know some of this is just like kids. We are by nature curious as kids, aren't we? But dad would take me to football games, and I honestly wouldn't care like who I was. What I wasn't like big into football, but it was just something we did together. And I wasn't interested in like the game. I wasn't really interested in the score. I was just like fascinated by like everyone in the stadium. I was like, oh my God, all of these people are just like acting wild. Like, what is going on? And I just had this curiosity. And even now, you know, like my husband always laughs at me because we went to see George Ezra the other day, and I was sat there and I was like, I wonder how many people here are actually happy in their relationship. And Matt was like, for fuck's sake, like, we've come to see George Ezra. And I was like, yeah, I know, but what do you think? And then you know, I was thinking about George Ezra, and a lot of his songs, I was like, a lot of these songs are about anxiety. Like, I wonder what his life experience is. And he like jokes with me now, he's like, oh, have a day off, like, just enjoy it. But it's like, I've always had this like really deep, not only felt things deeply, but I've always like thought things deeply. And again, that was something I made myself wrong for. That's another thing to think about, is like, what are you making yourself wrong for that you can start to actually just embrace? So I think with that, I started to be curious about myself, and I was like, why am I like so anxious? Like, why do I find it, like, why do I sweat when people ask me how I am? Because I get so like anxious about it. And it wasn't that, you know, obviously I can tell the story now with all of the learning and like understanding I've had since then. So I guess my kind of way of relaying it is slightly different probably to how I actually experienced it. But it was very much this gradual curiosity of like, why am I the way I am? Like, what can I do about that? How can I change it? And just like asking questions, I guess, about myself.
Mm. And I
Um
guess it just goes to show like how much this is your purpose, right? That you've had
yeah,
that. There's something sometimes we just can't put a finger on it, can we? Just
no.
that connection that we had.
And I think
So
I understood myself a lot through other people too. So um you know, like when I went to uni, I did sociology at uni, which is a bit, I don't know if people know what that is, but it's kind of like psychology,
it's
but it's more,
sociology, yeah.
yeah, I did you. It's more
Yeah.
about like this, you know, the influence our social world has rather than like our brain, isn't it? But and I volunteered for Childline on the phones, and like I really quickly got into like, oh my God, I love understanding people, I love helping people, but I think also in doing that I was helping to understand myself, because I was like, oh, hang on a minute, I also do that, and I also think that, and like, let's figure out why this happens.
Yeah.
And I think through doing that, I've got like a deeper sense of, yeah, who I am within all of that.
Mm.
But yeah, it is weird, isn't it? Because I feel like most people have this as like a midlife crisis at, at the earliest half
Yeah,
the
but that's
time. But
incredible though. That's incredible. I think like if I look back at my particularly my 20s and I think like why didn't I make those
mm,
connections? I will be honest and say it is because I was drinking and partying so much. So much. That's literally how I spent all my 20s. And so it was literally just this cycle of like drinking, partying,
yeah,
work, drinking, partying, work, and like I guess like that's probably got a lot to be said about it as well. Thinking about guys, it was just I guess like pure numbing, like at its best. But I had no idea. I thought I was happy because I was
yeah,
having all
yeah,
these
yeah.
guys, and doing all these fun things, and have these like I have amazing friends, and we were all in that kind of cycle together, you know. But I think, like, honestly, if you took out the alcohol, I reckon I would have had an awakening much, much sooner.
It's funny, isn't it? Like I don't. It's hard to even know what to call it, isn't it? Like I was having a conversation with someone I went to like this women's circle, like a
Oh, love
cacao ceremony.
it.
I know,
Yes, love it. Oh my God, where do you live?
Harrogate, so bit of a trek.
Damn.
um, but we were having this conversation about how, so one of the lady that led it, she was, I think, I don't know, I don't even want to put an age on her, but anyway, she's a lot older than me, probably like 15, 20 years older. And she was like, it's so nice to see someone young here because it feels like people are awakening so much younger than they used to. And I'm like, I've never really related to it in that way, but I guess that's what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, you can count that. I don't think there has to be like oh, I was 18, 19, so it doesn't count.
Well, it's more like I think I've just never experienced that moment. People often talk
Yeah,
about
I've
that
had
moment,
several,
don't
I
they?
think.
Yeah, well, I think I'm
I've
having
had
one now, to be honest. Now that I'm nearly 30. I'm like, I said to Matt yesterday, I know this isn't what necessarily what an awakening is, but I was like, right, I'm going to get a bob and I really want to get some more ear piercings. So that's what we're doing for my birthday.
I
It's
don't.
like, okay.
I did some training once, and I remember she said to us, like, just list your own like styles of awakenings. But I think that's it, isn't it? We
Hmm.
sometimes think we have to hit rock bottom, and we don't. We don't have to hit rock bottom to discover ourselves.
Hmm.
You know?
And
So
it's about doing it your way, isn't it? It's like another thing that we say, oh, it has to be this way, and it's like, no, it just has to be your way.
yeah, exactly. And we've only got our story, like we've only
Mm.
got our experience. What does love? Let's go in for the questions. Love, what does it mean to you? And has it changed over the years?
Um, what does it mean to me, and has it changed over the years? I think for me, it's like about the word that comes to my head, right? And I don't really know how to explain it, is like union. So it's like love for me is like you being at one with who you are and then everything else, as in like other people, the universe, like life. I don't know. It's almost like for me, it's about like this deep connection. that you have with yourself. Because if you're not, I guess you'll probably talk about this a lot, but if you're not, I don't mean that whole cliche of like you've got to love yourself first, which is kind of true, kind of true. But I feel like in how that's talked about a lot of the time, it loses its meaning. But if you're not deeply connected to like who you are, you can, you know, your connection to other things is always going to be limited, because I feel like your outer world is always reflective of your relationship with yourself, essentially. I think that's what I mean by union. I don't really know if that's an answer, but anyway, I think for me, love is about like depth and like connection and meaning and openness and unity. And yes, that's changed over time
Yeah.
because I think, I don't know, especially growing up, you know, like you hear all about the fairy tales, don't you? And like, I'm not sure, you know, in many ways, like my relationship with Matt looks like a fairy tale on paper, but it's like in seeing that you miss like the depth of actually understanding who you are as a person and like everything that you have to navigate in a relationship, which is often like the shit stuff that brings true connection. Yeah, does that make any sense? I'm not really
Yeah,
sure
it
it does.
does. Yeah, because so much of the work we do, especially in my membership, so much of the work we do is about using like habits and routine to really like focus on you, keep yourself in mind and discover yourself. And some of the ways we do that, I try not to do it too much around connecting with others because so many of them are lost in that already.
Yeah.
And it is through connection with self, the universe, nature, you know, and really that connection with like whether it's the universe or nature, for me, like they play a huge, huge role. And then the connection with others, it just unfolds. And I love what you say about it being like just deeper and meaningful because it's not just chemistry and surface stuff, you know, it's beyond those first few dates.
Well, yeah. And it's beyond the fairy tale in that story sense too, isn't it? It's about like how do you hold space for each other through both of your shit, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just why we have to get beyond spending time with people that you're not even willing to tell them what you need. You can't go deep with someone who's not willing to go there with you,
Mm.
you know? So, what about when, because obviously we know love is incredible and amazing, when it throws you off, when things aren't going so well, how do you navigate those times?
I feel like it always comes back to communication with me, as in having that like curiosity with yourself of like, okay, what's going on here, and like, how am I playing a role? You know, what role am I playing rather? Because like no relationship, like a relationship exists between two people, right? Like you can't have a struggle in a relationship with one of you. That doesn't make any sense. But what I mean is like both of you always have a role to play, right? Whether we want to acknowledge that or not, because like often the stubbornness in me is like, nope, I'm perfect. Um, but it's like that having that curiosity of, you know, okay, like what's happening for me? Like why am I don't know, being triggered here, or like struggling with this, or feeling disconnected, or like whatever the thing is. And what can I take ownership for? Because I think it's really challenging, isn't it, that whole like consciously communicating in relationships. But actually once we're taking ownership for our stuff, it gives the other person permission to do that too. Whereas if we're actually coming at a situation from a place of like, you need to do this, you need to do that, you haven't done this, you haven't done that, I need this, I need that, it's like the only real option the other person has in terms of how they respond is like either further disconnection, or as in like, you know, kind of withdrawing or being defensive. Like we're not actually creating that safety for them to be like, oh, okay, this is what's happening for me and what do we do about it? And actually that, you know, that the depth and the meaning and getting through the struggle comes from creating the safety for each other to be open. But I think that's hard. It's easier said than done, isn't it?
Do you know what's really interesting is I put a reel out and it was about separation anxiety. and obviously like how intense that can become. And I know when people are in that state of anxiety, and how difficult that can be for the partner, right? When they do become needy, they are over messaging, they are over contacting. So I get that. But someone replied saying, "Oh, this is my partner." Like their partner is the one with the separation anxiety. Um, and they were just basically like, "It's exhausting, it's suffocating, it's doing my head in. Nothing I say helps." I can't remember it word for word, but this is like how I'm remembering it. Like, nothing I say helps. And they, yeah, just it's all on them, right? And I just thought, in seeing that message, I was just like, wow, like there is such a disconnection there from both of
Mm.
you. That yes, obviously they're feeling very anxious. And on the flip side, this is the response they're getting, which is the extreme opposite of, "It's too much, you're suffocating, you're this." And I'm just like, this person clearly can't see their role. I don't know them
Mm.
enough to make a, you know, snapshot judgment really, but I feel like to comment that and to have that, it's like there's a disconnection there, you
It's
know.
also, I think it's, yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because in being honest with someone else, you also have to first be honest with yourself. And like sometimes that's actually the harder bit. It's like, I don't want to acknowledge like that I'm playing a part in this, because again, it's us almost disempowering ourselves, isn't it? It's like, it's your problem, it's for you to fix, you solve it. Like I am not able to do this kind of thing. And this is probably like a whole new podcast episode really, but, and I don't know if you have many mums or are aware of many mums in your world, but like this is definitely something we've navigated in our relationship a lot more since Freddie, because those experiences of like rejection within us as a couple have been really significant, because there's all of a sudden a child in the midst of it all. And for me, he's, you know, as he's getting older, that gets slightly easier, but like he's always my number one priority, like non-negotiable. But that means like for my husband, he's been experiencing lots of rejection, and I think that's not necessarily something that people, it's actually been one of the most challenging things that we've navigated in parenthood. It isn't Freddie, it's like how that shifts your dynamic as a relationship, and what that brings up again in terms of your own insecurities, and you know how you then deal with them. And I think every kind of, you know, it's important to acknowledge that all of these different phases of life and things that happen in our life can like initiate all of these things in like really different ways, even if you thought you'd kind of dealt with all of that, or you'd put it all to bed.
Yes, I
It kind of
love you for
comes back up
saying
again.
that. Exactly. That's like the classic, isn't it? When people are like, "I thought I'd healed," and then they get into a
Yeah.
relationship with someone, or they start dating again and they see it come up. And it's that lack of compassion for self again, or thinking that healing has some kind of end zone where it's done and you never get triggered there again because I did my work on it, you know?
Yeah.
So you get to go back to any age, and you can give yourself a lesson in love, but you can't say no regrets or that you wouldn't change a thing. What lesson are you going to give yourself?
I think to stop making your worth conditional. Like everything becomes so tangled up. Like our sense of self becomes so tangled up with so many external things, like, you know, how we're treated, whether we're in a relationship, you know, the milestones we meet, the grades we get, the job we have, the pay we have, you know, it changes as we get older, but from really young, you know, with like Freddie, it's he's all of a sudden measured on like how much he cries and how well he sleeps. And then it kind of evolves into whatever happens at school, and then secondary school it's more about attainment and achievement. And then, you know, you hit adulthood and it's like, and have you gone to uni at this point, and have you got this, and have you got that, and have you got the other? And then, you know, becoming a mum, it's almost like I notice myself making my self-worth tangled up in like how my child's behaving, and it's like, oh my god, I can't have the child that's like crying, or that's not sleeping, or that's not eating, or that's being fussy, or that's being difficult. It's almost like we have all of these ways of making our self-worth conditional, and I think that's what I would want to say to my younger self, is like, none of it is ever about that, because for as long as you make your self-worth conditional, you're never worthy.
Where can people find you?
um so on Instagram I'm at This Is Becky Rodrigues. My website is beckyrodrigues.co.uk. And I'm also soon, I don't know when you're sharing this actually, but I'm soon going to be doing a free event which is Freedom to Rise. which
Oh,
is all around supporting you, essentially to be more of who you are. I'll share the link depending on when you are
when
finding it.
is it?
I haven't actually got a date because I'm still doing all the admin side, but it'll be in May.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure it will. Yeah, just send me the details and I'll link to you below. That sounds good. Maybe I'll come to that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Honestly, I really, really appreciate you coming here for a second time. And
Thank you
now
for
people
having
get
me.
to really share your message. So thank you.